My name is Margaret Thornfield, and I'm 72 years old now. The doctors tell me I have perhaps 6 months before the cancer takes me, which is why I'm finally writing this down. For 63 years, I've carried this secret alone, never breathing a word to anyone. Not my children, not my late husband Robert, not even the therapists who tried to help me understand my nightmares. This story begins in the summer of 1961, when I was 9 years old, living with my parents on Maple Grove Street in Cedar Falls, Iowa. Our house sat at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, backing up to the old Whitmore Woods that stretched for miles behind our neighborhood. That spring, my father decided to build me something special for my 10th birthday. He'd been working on a mysterious project behind our tool shed for weeks, whistling old war songs while he hammered and sawed. I'd peek around the corner, trying to guess what he was making, but he'd always shoo me away with a wink and a promise that I'd love it. When he finally revealed it on my birthday morning in June, I gasped with delight. It was enormous, at least to my 9-year-old eyes. A perfect square sandbox measuring 12 feet on each side, built from sturdy cedar planks. At each corner, he'd installed little bench seats where friends could sit and play. The craftsmanship was beautiful. My father had been a carpenter before the war, and his attention to detail showed in every joint and corner. "Now we just need to fill her up," he said, ruffling my auburn hair. That afternoon, truck after truck arrived, dumping load after load of the finest white sand I'd ever seen. It was so clean it almost sparkled in the sunlight, soft as powder between my fingers. Within days, I'd recruited my 2 best friends from the neighborhood, Tommy Carlisle from 3 houses down, and Sarah Beth McKenna from across the street. Tommy was 10, a year older than Sarah Beth and me, with freckles and perpetually grass-stained knees. Sarah Beth was quiet and thoughtful, always reading books about faraway places and ancient civilizations. We spent nearly every day that summer in the sandbox. Tommy brought his collection of army men and miniature tanks, while Sarah Beth contributed her extensive set of castle figurines, knights, princesses, and dragons. I added my beloved set of pioneer figures, complete with covered wagons and tiny livestock. We'd create elaborate worlds in that sand, building mountains and valleys, rivers and roads, entire civilizations that we'd knock down and rebuild the next day. It was mid-July when we first saw it. We were in the middle of an epic battle between Tommy's army and Sarah Beth's dragon knights when the sand in the very center of the box began to move. Not like wind was blowing it. There was no wind that day, but like something underneath was stirring it from below. "Look," Sarah Beth whispered, pointing with a trembling finger. We all stopped playing and stared as a small whirlpool formed in the sand, growing larger and deeper with each passing second. Then, without warning, something pale pushed up through the surface. It was a hand, but not like any hand I'd ever seen. It was small, about the size of a child's, but the skin was papery white, almost translucent, with veins showing through like dark rivers. The fingers were too long, too thin, and they moved with an otherworldly grace as they stretched and flexed above the sand. All 3 of us screamed and scrambled out of the sandbox, running to our respective corners. The hand paused for a moment, as if listening, then slowly rotated like a periscope searching the area around it. After perhaps 30 seconds, it slipped back beneath the surface, leaving only a small depression in the sand. We stood there in stunned silence for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. "Did you see that?" Tommy finally whispered. "The hand." Sarah Beth's voice was barely audible. I nodded, unable to speak. When we told our parents, the reactions were predictably dismissive. Tommy's mother scolded him for making up stories, while my father chuckled and suggested I'd been reading too many ghost stories. Sarah Beth's parents, both college professors, gave her a gentle lecture about the power of imagination and group hysteria. But we knew what we'd seen. For the next 2 weeks, we avoided the sandbox entirely, though we'd often stand at a safe distance, watching and waiting. The sand remained still and normal, giving no hint of the strangeness we'd witnessed. It was Tommy who finally worked up the courage to go back in. "Maybe it was just a fluke," he reasoned. "Maybe it won't happen again." Sarah Beth and I watched nervously as he climbed over the side and walked cautiously to the center of the sandbox. He stood there for several minutes, shifting his weight from foot to foot, but nothing happened. Gradually, we joined him, and soon we were playing again, though with noticeably less enthusiasm than before. The hand appeared again 3 days later. This time, we didn't run. We were older now, or at least we felt older after our first encounter. Instead, we moved to the corner benches and watched with fascination as the pale hand emerged from the sand and began to move in slow, deliberate patterns. "It's looking for something," Sarah Beth observed. She was right. The hand was clearly searching, fingers extended and moving in careful sweeps across the surface of the sand. Tommy, always the boldest of us, picked up one of his plastic army men and tossed it gently toward the hand. The moment the tiny figure hit the sand near those pale fingers, the hand froze, then quickly grasped the toy and examined it with obvious curiosity. The fingers turned it over and over, exploring every detail, before the hand disappeared beneath the surface, taking the army man with it. We waited. 10 minutes later, the hand returned, emerging slowly from the sand. This time, it held something in its closed fist. As we watched, the fingers opened to reveal a beautiful piece of sea glass, smooth and green and perfectly polished. "It's trading with us," Sarah Beth breathed, and so began the strangest friendship of my childhood. Over the following weeks, we established a routine. We'd bring small toys, interesting rocks, or shiny objects, and the hand would take them below, returning minutes later with gifts of its own. We received polished stones, fragments of what looked like ancient pottery, pieces of fossilized wood, and once, memorably, a tiny carved figure that looked almost Egyptian in design. As summer wound down and school approached, our visits became less frequent but no less fascinating. The hand seemed to recognize us now, emerging more quickly when we arrived and lingering longer on the surface. Sometimes it would actually wave as if greeting old friends. Sarah Beth, with her love of ancient history, became convinced that we were communicating with some kind of underground civilization. "Maybe they're the descendants of a lost tribe," she theorized, "living in caves beneath our town." Tommy, ever practical, thought it might be some kind of unusual animal. "Like a mole person," he suggested, though he could never explain how a mole would have such human-like hands. I didn't know what to think. All I knew was that our Sandbox friend had become the most exciting part of my summer. Then, in early September, just after school had started, we made a discovery that changed everything. Sarah Beth had brought a small mirror from her mother's vanity, curious to see how the hand would react to its own reflection. When she placed it in the sand near those pale fingers, the hand picked up the mirror and held it at various angles, clearly fascinated by the reflected light and images. But when the hand tilted the mirror toward us, we saw something reflected in its surface that made our blood run cold. Behind the hand, visible in the mirror's reflection, was a face. It was pale like the hand, with large, dark eyes that seemed ancient beyond measure. The face was thin, almost gaunt, but unmistakably intelligent, and it was looking directly at us. We sat frozen on our bench seats, staring at the mirror as the face stared back. Then, slowly, impossibly, it smiled. The hand lowered the mirror and disappeared beneath the sand, taking the mirror with it. That night, I had the first of what would become a lifetime of nightmares. In my dreams, I was underground, walking through endless tunnels carved from red clay and stone. Pale figures moved in the shadows, watching me with those same dark, ancient eyes. They whispered to me in a language I couldn't understand but somehow knew was very, very old. The next day, none of us wanted to return to the Sandbox. We'd crossed some invisible line, seen something we weren't meant to see. For the first time since the hand had appeared, we were truly afraid. But our curiosity was stronger than our fear. When we returned the following Saturday, we found something waiting for us in the sand. It was the mirror, but now it was different. The surface was etched with symbols that looked like no alphabet any of us had ever seen. The symbols seemed to shift and change when we weren't looking directly at them, forming patterns that hurt our eyes if we stared too long. "We should stop," Sarah Beth whispered. "This is getting too strange." But Tommy was already reaching for the mirror. "Just one more trade," he said. "I want to see what happens if we give them something bigger. That was our mistake." Tommy brought his most prized possession the next day, a genuine arrowhead his grandfather had found in the woods, mounted in a small wooden frame. It was his treasure, something he'd never normally risk losing. When the hand emerged and accepted the arrowhead, it stayed below much longer than usual. We waited nearly an hour before it returned, and when it did, we gasped in horror. The hand was no longer alone. A second hand had joined it, this one larger and more weathered, with skin like old leather and nails that were long and yellowed. Behind them, barely visible beneath the surface of the sand, we could see the outline of a face. The same face we'd seen in the mirror, but clearer now, more defined. The larger hand held something out to us. A wooden frame exactly like Tommy's arrowhead display, but inside it was something that made us all scream. It was Tommy's class photo from the previous year, but his face had been carefully cut out and replaced with one of those strange, ancient symbols. We ran then, faster than we'd ever run before, not stopping until we reached the safety of our respective homes. Behind us, we could hear something that might have been laughter drifting up from beneath the sand. The next morning, Tommy was gone. His bed hadn't been slept in. His bicycle was still in the garage. There were no signs of struggle, no indication that he'd left voluntarily. He had simply vanished in the night. The police searched for weeks. Our entire neighborhood was turned upside down as investigators looked for any clue to Tommy's disappearance. They questioned everyone, including Sarah Beth and me, but we were too terrified to tell them about the sandbox. Who would have believed us? Sarah Beth's family moved away 2 weeks later. Her parents, shaken by Tommy's disappearance, decided that Cedar Falls was no longer safe for their daughter. I never saw her again. My father, perhaps sensing my distress, dismantled the sandbox that autumn. He told my mother it was because I'd outgrown it, but I knew the real reason. He'd seen the change in me, the fear that had replaced joy in my eyes whenever I looked toward the backyard. But dismantling the sandbox didn't make the dream stop. For 63 years, I've dreamed of those tunnels, those pale faces, those ancient eyes. In my dreams, I can hear Tommy calling to me from somewhere deep underground, asking why I didn't help him, why I ran away and left him behind. Sometimes, in the deepest part of the night, I wonder if Sarah Beth has the same dreams. I wonder if she spent her life carrying the same guilt, the same terrible knowledge of what we unleashed that summer. And sometimes, when I'm feeling particularly brave or particularly foolish, I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed and tried to help Tommy instead of running away in fear. But mostly, I just remember the last thing I saw before we fled that day. Tommy's modified photograph being slowly pulled back beneath the sand, while those ancient eyes watched us with what I could only interpret as satisfaction. They had found what they were looking for. They had found a child. Last month, just after my diagnosis, I drove back to Cedar Falls for the first time in decades. The old neighborhood had changed dramatically. New houses, wider streets, modern playgrounds replacing the empty lots where we used to play. But the woods were still there, stretching back from where our houses used to stand. And according to the locals I spoke with, children still go missing from time to time. Not often, and not in any pattern that the authorities can identify, but often enough that parents keep their children close and warn them away from playing alone in the deep woods. I didn't have the courage to walk back to where our house once stood, where my father built that beautiful cedar sandbox all those years ago. I was afraid of what I might find beneath the new construction, afraid that some doors are better left unopened. But as I drove away from Cedar Falls for what I knew would be the last time, I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere beneath that peaceful Iowa soil, in tunnels that predate our civilization by thousands of years, ancient beings still wait patiently for the right moment, the right child, the right opportunity to reach up from their underground world and pull someone down into the darkness. And somewhere in those same tunnels, I believe Tommy is still there, still 9 years old, still playing with toys in the sand while pale figures with ancient eyes watch him with satisfaction. I'm dying now, and perhaps that's for the best. Some secrets are too heavy to carry for a lifetime, and some guilt too deep to ever fully heal. But if you're a parent reading this, if you have children who love to play in sandboxes and dig in the earth, please remember my story. Watch them carefully. Pay attention to changes in the sand that have no explanation. And if you ever see a pale hand reaching up from below, don't wait to see what it wants. Just run. Run and don't look back. Because some friendships are too dangerous to pursue, and some curiosity too costly to indulge. And in the end, we never know what ancient hungers we might be feeding when we think we're just playing innocent games in the sand.